There is a man sitting at a wooden table on the edge of a fishing town, and almost everyone who walks past him hates him. The town is called Capernaum. It sits on the northern shore of a lake the locals call the Sea of Galilee, though it is not a sea at all, just a wide blue lake ringed by hills, loud with fishermen and the smell of salt and tar. The man at the table is not a fisherman. His hands are clean. In front of him are stacks of coins, a set of scales, and a ledger. Behind him stands a Roman soldier bored, leaning on a spear. The man is a tax collector, and in this town that single word, tax collector, is one of the dirtiest things you can call someone. You have to understand what that meant. Rome occupied this land. Rome wanted its money. And rather than send Romans to squeeze it out of the people, Rome hired locals, Jews willing to tax their own neighbors, their own cousins, their own childhood friends. Whatever they collected over Rome's quota they kept, so every coin this man takes is a coin off a poor family's table. To his own people he is not a businessman. He is a traitor who got rich betraying his nation to the empire crushing it. Look at his face for a second. He has money, he has a house, he has security most people in this town will never have. And he has no friends, none. When he walks into the synagogue, conversations stop. When he passes in the market, mothers pull their children a little closer. Remember this man at the table. We are going to come back to him. But not yet, because here is the strange thing. The man at that table is the one who wrote the book we are about to walk through together, the most carefully built, quoted, most influential of the four Gospels. The book placed first in the entire New Testament, the bridge between the Old Testament and the New. And the man who wrote it spent his early life as the most hated kind of person in his whole society. His name is Matthew. And once you know that, once you know the author was an outsider, a man written off as too far gone, you start to read his gospel completely differently. Here's what most people miss. Most of us read the book of Matthew the way you'd read a scrapbook, a sermon here, a miracle there, a parable, a healing, a confrontation with some religious leaders, and on for 28 chapters until we get to the cross. It feels like a pile, a beautiful pile, but a pile. It is not a pile. This is not a collection of sermons stitched together. This is not a random list of miracles. This is not 28 chapters that happen to sit next to each other on a page. This is one argument, built by one man, to prove one thing to his own people, the people who hated him. And the thing he is trying to prove is this: the king you have been waiting for 4,000 years has already come. And you almost missed him. Matthew is a man building a case. He writes like a tax collector, actually. Orderly, structured, obsessed with getting the record right. He arranges everything. He counts things. He keeps coming back over and over to a single phrase that beats through the whole book like a drum, that it might be fulfilled. He wants you to see that nothing here is an accident. Every piece clicks into a slot that was carved out centuries before anyone in this story was born. And he tells you what the whole book is about in the very first chapter, in a single name. An angel speaks to a frightened carpenter and says the child will be called Emmanuel, a Hebrew word that means simply, God with us. Hold on to that name, God with us, because by the time we reach the final sentence of this book, 28 chapters and 3 years and 1 cross and 1 empty tomb later, that name is going to come back. And when it does, it is going to close a circle so perfect, it will change the way you see the entire story. But to get there, we have to start where Matthew starts, not with a baby, not even with a manger. He starts with a list of names, and buried inside that boring list of names is a code. The book of Matthew opens with 17 verses of names. Most people skip them. You probably have. Somebody begat somebody, who begat somebody, who begat somebody. 40-some generations marching from a man named Abraham all the way down to a man named Joseph. It reads like the most skippable page in the Bible. It is one of the most clever things in the Bible. Because Matthew, the man obsessed with order, has arranged this list into 3 groups, 3 sets of exactly 14 generations. From Abraham to King David, 14. From David to the exile in Babylon, 14. From the exile to the Christ, 14. And the moment you ask why 14, why not 15, why not 12, you find the code. In ancient Hebrew, there were no separate numbers. The letters of the alphabet were the numbers. Every letter had a numerical value, and the name David in Hebrew is spelled with 3 letters, DVD. Their values, 464. Add them together. 14. Matthew stamped David's name into the very structure of the family tree 3 times before he ever says the word king out loud. It is a headline written in a code his Jewish readers would catch instantly. This man Jesus is the son of David, the rightful heir, the king. Here's what most people miss. There are women in this genealogy, which almost never happened in a Jewish family record. And the women Matthew chose are not the respectable matriarchs you'd expect. There's Tamar, who tricked her father-in-law. There's Rahab, a prostitute from Jericho. There's Ruth, a foreigner. There's Bathsheba, named only as the woman who had been the wife of Uriah, a reminder of David's worst sin. Matthew could have hidden all of them. He's a man who arranges things carefully. He left them in on purpose, because the king he is introducing did not come from a clean family. He came down through scandal, and through outsiders, and through people who had been written off. Sit with that for a moment. The man writing this was an outsider too, and then the king arrives, not in a palace, in a problem. A young woman named Mary is engaged to a carpenter named Joseph, and before they live together, she is found to be pregnant. Now meet Joseph. He is in many ways the quietest man in the entire New Testament. Joseph never speaks a single recorded word, not one in any gospel. But watch what he does. By the law and custom of his world, Joseph has every right to expose Mary publicly, to shame her. The accusation hanging in the air is the worst thing a woman in that culture could be accused of. And Joseph, Matthew tells us, was a just man. But he decided to do it quietly, to protect her, to take the loss himself. That is who he is before God ever speaks to him. Then an angel comes to him in a dream and tells him the child is from God, and that he is to name the boy Jesus. And Joseph wakes up and obeys. No argument, no speech, he just does it. 4 separate times in these early chapters God speaks to Joseph in a dream, and 4 times this silent man simply gets up and obeys. But it gets stranger, because the first people to recognize who this child is are not the priests, not the religious experts. They are foreigners. From somewhere east, Persia, maybe Babylon, come a group of men Matthew calls magi, astrologers, Gentiles. The very kind of people a devout Jew would have kept at arm's length. They have followed a star across hundreds of miles of desert, and they arrive in Jerusalem asking a dangerous question out loud. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? That question lands in the ears of a man it should never have reached. Herod. Herod the Great was the Rome-appointed king of Judea, and he was by any measure a monster wearing a crown. We don't just have the Bible's word for this. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing decades later, documents Herod's paranoia in stomach-turning detail. Herod murdered one of his wives. He murdered 3 of his own sons because he feared they wanted his throne. The Roman Emperor Augustus reportedly joked that it was safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son. This is the man who now hears that a baby has been born who is being called king. You can already feel where this is going. Herod tells the Magi to find the child and report back, pretending he wants to worship too. The Magi find Jesus, give their gifts, and are warned in a dream not to return to Herod. They go home another way. And Herod, enraged that he's been outwitted, gives an order that still darkens these pages 2,000 years later. He sends soldiers to Bethlehem to kill every boy under the age of 2. Matthew, the man who keeps records, records it. He quotes the prophet Jeremiah, a voice heard in Ramah weeping, refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. The King of Peace enters a world that greets him with a massacre. Joseph, warned in yet another dream, has already fled with Mary and the child into Egypt by night. The king survives, but other mothers' sons do not. Sit in that grief for a second, because Matthew does not rush past it, and neither should we. Then the years pass quietly. The family settles in a nowhere town called Nazareth, and when Jesus is about 30, he walks down to the Jordan River, where a wild preacher named John is baptizing crowds and shouting one word over and over. The Greek word is metanoeo. We translate it repent, but it doesn't mean feel sorry. It means turn around. Change direction. Stop walking the way you were walking and walk the other way. Jesus steps into the water. As he comes up, Matthew tells us the heavens open, and the voice speaks from above. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." The king has been publicly named, and immediately he is led into the wilderness to be tested for 40 days. He comes out, and he walks up to 2 fishermen casting nets into that same blue lake near Capernaum, and he says 5 words that will pull ordinary men out of their ordinary lives forever. "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And they drop their nets, and they go. Now hold that phrase in your mind. Follow me, because Jesus is going to say it again. To someone you would never expect. To someone sitting at a table. Stay with me for a moment, because we're about to step into the heart of the book. If this walk through Matthew is helping you see the story in a new way, do me one quick favor: subscribe, so you don't miss the rest of these. We're building something here, chapter by chapter, and the best part is still ahead. And while you're at it, start thinking about this question, because I'm going to ask it again at the very end. Out of everything in Matthew, which moment changes how you see Jesus the most? Hold your answer now. The king has been named. He has called his first followers, and he is about to open his mouth and preach the most famous sermon in human history. Here is something Matthew built into his book that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. He organized the teachings of Jesus into 5 great speeches. 5, not 4, not 6. To a Jewish reader, that number would ring like a bell. Because the scriptures, the foundation of everything, began with 5 books. The 5 books of Moses. And Moses was the man who went up a mountain and came down with the law that made them a nation. So watch what Matthew does. He takes Jesus, and the very first of these 5 great speeches he delivers. Where? On a mountain. A new teacher on a new mountain giving a new law to a new people. Matthew is practically shouting it. This is the new Moses. Only greater. Pay attention to this because it's the key to half the book. We call that first speech the Sermon on the Mount. And it opens with a series of blessings so upside down they still stop people cold 2,000 years later. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he says. "Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, the hungry, the merciful, the persecuted." Stop and feel how strange that is. Every kingdom you have ever heard of blesses the strong, the rich, the winners, the ones at the top of the table. And here comes a king whose very first public act is to climb a hill, sit down, and pronounce blessing on exactly the people the world steps over. If you've ever felt broken or grieved, or like you simply don't have it together, you know that feeling, then understand something. You are the first person he blesses. Now remember who is writing this down. A tax collector, a man who knew exactly what it felt like to be on the outside of every blessing his religion offered. Of course, he never forgot this sermon. It was the first time he heard a king say, the door was open to people like him. The Greek word at the center of it all is that same word from the river, metanoeo, turn around. Because the kingdom Jesus describes isn't something you achieve by climbing. It's something you enter by turning, by admitting you're poor in spirit and walking through the only door that was ever open to the poor in spirit anyway. And then Jesus comes down from the mountain, and Matthew shows us the sermon was not just words. He heals a leper, a man no one was allowed to touch by touching him. He heals a Roman officer's servant and marvels at the faith of a Gentile soldier, the very kind of man who stood guard behind tax tables. He calms a storm with a sentence. He casts out demons. Chapter after chapter, the power matches the promises. And then we reach the verse that, for me, is the secret center of this entire gospel. Jesus is walking through Capernaum, and he sees a man sitting at a tax booth. You know this man. We met him at the very beginning. Imagine what he expected that morning. Another day at the booth. More coins. More cold shoulders. More people crossing the street so they wouldn't have to pass him. By now he must have stopped hoping for anything else. And then a rabbi walks up the road, trailed by fishermen and a crowd, and stops. At his table. The one table in town nobody chose to stand near. Matthew, writing about himself, does not flinch. He writes it in the third person, plain and unsparing. He saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. That's it. That's the whole sentence. The most important moment of Matthew's life, and he gives it the same flat, honest tone he gives everyone else. "Follow me," and he rose. The two words Jesus spoke to fishermen, he now speaks to the traitor. And the traitor stands up and walks away from the one thing that gave him security, and the one thing that made everyone hate him, in the same motion. We'll come all the way back to that table before we're done. Hold it, because look what Jesus does next. He goes to dinner at Matthew's house, with Matthew's friends, which means a room full of tax collectors and the kind of people respectable society wouldn't be seen with. And the religious leaders are scandalized. "Why does your teacher eat with these people?" And Jesus answers them with a line that could be carved over the door of the whole book. "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." That's not a footnote, that's the thesis. But not everyone is glad the king has come. The crowds love him. The religious establishment grows colder by the chapter. The tension thickens like a coming storm. And Jesus, knowing it, takes his 12 closest followers far to the north, to a place called Caesarea Philippi, and asks them the question the whole book has been driving toward. "Who do you say that I am?" And it is Peter, Simon Peter, the impulsive fisherman, the one who blurts things out, the one who will later fail spectacularly, who gets there first. "You are the Christ," he says, "the Son of the living God." This is the hinge of the entire gospel. Everything before this moment was building the case. Everything after it pays the price. And Jesus answers Peter with a promise. "You are Peter, the rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it." Now watch what happens next, because the moment after the highest confession comes the hardest turn. From that point on, Jesus stops moving in circles around Galilee. He sets his face toward one city, Jerusalem, and he begins to tell his followers plainly what is waiting for him there. That he will be handed over, that he will suffer, that he will be killed, and on the third day, raised. Peter, the rock, fresh off the greatest thing he ever said, pulls Jesus aside and tells him to stop talking like that. And Jesus turns and rebukes him harder than he rebukes anyone in the book. Because the road only goes one direction now. The 5 sermons are nearly finished. The miracles have made their point. The king has been confessed. And the king is walking on purpose toward a cross. He enters Jerusalem on a borrowed donkey, and the crowds tear branches from the trees and throw their coats on the road and shout for a king. 5 days later, those same streets will be silent. Watch how fast it turns. Jesus walks into the temple and overturns the tables of the money changers. And something in that scene should catch in your throat because the man recording it once sat behind a table of money himself. He spars with the religious leaders and wins every exchange. He tells them, to their faces, that the kingdom will be taken from them and given to people who will actually bear its fruit. And the establishment, humiliated and afraid, stops debating and starts plotting. And then one of his own 12 goes to them with a price. 30 pieces of silver. The man who keeps records records the exact amount. Here's the part nobody tells you about the last night. At the final meal, Jesus takes bread and a cup and tells his friends that this is his body, this is his blood given for them. And then he says something that must have sounded impossible, that all of them, everyone, will fall away that very night. Peter, the rock, swears he never will. Even if everyone else does, he says, "I will not." And Jesus looks at him and says, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. They go out to a garden called Gethsemane, and here Matthew shows you something he could have left out, and didn't. The king, the one who calmed storms, the one who never flinched, falls on his face in the dirt and begs, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." He is in such anguish he asks his closest friends just to stay awake with him. They fall asleep. 3 times he prays alone. Then the torches come through the trees. Judas kisses him. The soldiers take him. And every disciple, every single one, including the rock, runs. Picture yourself in that courtyard. Peter follows at a distance into the courtyard of the high priest and warms himself by a fire. And 3 times, just as Jesus said, someone points at him, and 3 times Peter swears he never knew the man. And then a rooster crows, And Matthew gives us one of the most devastating sentences in all of Scripture. Peter remembered, and he went out and wept bitterly. The strong one broke, exactly as Jesus knew he would. Hold that, because it matters for where we're going. They beat him, they mock him, they press a crown of thorns onto his head and bow in front of him and laugh. They hand him to Rome, and Rome nails him to a cross between two criminals, and the sky goes dark in the middle of the day. And from that cross comes the loudest silence in the Bible, because here is the King whose very name in chapter 1 was Emmanuel, God with us. The whole book has been building this one word into your heart. With us, with us, with us. And now in the darkest hour of the story, this same Jesus cries out the words of an old psalm into the black sky. My God, why have you forsaken me? The God who is with us, experiencing what it feels like to be without God, so that you would never have to. Sit there for a moment. Don't rush it. And now let me ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly inside your own chest. Have you ever been the person who didn't belong at the table? The one with the reputation, the one people assumed was too far gone, the one who walked into the room and felt the conversations change, the one not picked, not chosen, standing on the outside of a blessing you were sure was meant for everybody but you. Then you understand the man who wrote this book better than you think, because that is exactly who Matthew was. And now we come all the way back to the table. Remember the first thing I told you. A man sitting behind coins on the edge of a fishing town, hated by everyone who walked past. That man wrote this gospel, the traitor, the outsider, the last person any rabbi would have chosen. And Jesus walked up to his table and said 2 words, "Follow me," and the door that had been shut to Matthew his whole life swung open. So now read the last scene of his book and feel what he is doing. Jesus, alive again, the tomb empty, stands on a mountain, another mountain, with the same followers who had run, the same Peter who had wept, and he gives them their final orders. And the tax collector, writing it down, makes sure the command reaches as far as a command can possibly reach. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, everyone. The outsiders, the foreigners like the Magi, the sinners he ate dinner with, the traitors at tax tables. Matthew is throwing the doors open to the whole world, because they were once thrown open for him. And then the very last words of the book, and here is where the circle closes. The book opened with a name, Emmanuel, God with us. And it ends with the risen King saying these words over his people, the final sentence Matthew ever wrote. And behold, I am with you always, to the very end of the age. God with us in chapter 1. I am with you always in chapter 28. The whole gospel from the first promise to the last is one unbroken sentence. I am with you. The tax collector who once sat alone at a table where no one would join him, spent the rest of his life telling the world that the God of the universe had come to sit down beside the very people no one else would. So what do you carry out of this book? Let me leave you with 3 things. The first is this. The Gospel of Matthew is not a scrapbook. It never was. It is one deliberate, carefully built argument from a man who counted everything, that the king the world had waited 4,000 years for had finally come exactly as the prophets said he would. That it might be fulfilled, every name in that genealogy, every one of the 5 sermons, it all clicks into a slot carved out centuries before. Nothing in this story is an accident. The second is closer to home. If the God of this book kept appointments across 40 generations, if he moved through scandal and exile, and a massacre, and a manger to arrive on the exact day he had promised, then your life is not a series of random accidents either. The same God who was that precise with history is that attentive to you. The drumbeat that runs under all 28 chapters, fulfilled, 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 is telling you that you are not living in chaos. You are being met on purpose by a God who keeps his word. And the third, this is the one I want to stay with you after you close this video. The table is still open. The same 2 words that Jesus spoke to a hated tax collector on the edge of a fishing town, follow me, he is still speaking. And here is the thing the religious people never understood, the thing Matthew spent his whole life shouting. You do not have to clean yourself up first. He didn't call Matthew after the tax booth. He called him at it. He doesn't wait at the far end of the room for you to become worthy. He walks straight up to your table, in the middle of your worst reputation, and sits down. This is not a story about a book. This is not a story about an old empire and a forgotten road. This is not a story about religion. This is the story of the God who looked at the one person nobody would choose, and chose him. And he is looking at you, Emmanuel. God with us, I am with you always, to the very end of the age. Now I want to hear from you. Back at the start, I asked you to hold on to a question, and here it is again. Out of everything in Matthew, the manger, the mountain, the table, the cross, the empty tomb, which moment changes how you see Jesus the most? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I promise yours will preach to someone else who scrolls past it. If this walk through Matthew gave you even one thing you'd never seen before, subscribe and stay with us. We're going book by book, and the next one is going to be just as good. And the next time someone tells you the Bible is just a pile of old stories stitched together, you'll know the truth. Somebody built this on purpose. For you, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.